San Francisco, California, January the 3rd to the 4th, 2026. San Francisco woke up to rising water, not from a single violent wave, but from a dangerous convergence of forces that meteorologists had warned about for days. Heavy, persistent rainfall pushed rivers and creeks toward their limits, while unusually high king tides in the San Francisco Bay amplified the impact along the coastline and low-lying neighborhoods. What followed over the weekend of January the 3rd and January the 4th, 2026, was one of the most disruptive coastal flooding events the Bay Area had experienced in years, affecting millions of residents across Northern California. The storm system responsible for this event was part of a broader Pacific weather pattern that had been delivering repeated rounds of rain to California. By the time the worst flooding began, much of the ground across the Bay Area was already saturated after several consecutive days of rainfall. In San Francisco itself, rain gauges recorded widespread moderate to heavy precipitation over a 24-hour period, with totals in many neighborhoods reaching several dozen millimeters. In the surrounding coastal hills and North Bay areas, localized rainfall totals were even higher, as moisture-laden air was forced upward by the terrain, producing heavier downpours. At the same time, astronomical king tides, among the highest tides of the year, were pushing seawater deeper into the bay than usual. These tides, driven by the alignment of the Earth, Moon, and Sun, raised water levels well above the normal high tide mark. When the peak of the tide coincided with ongoing rainfall and storm runoff, drainage systems were overwhelmed. Water that would normally flow out to the bay instead had nowhere to go. In San Francisco, flooding was reported along portions of the Embarcadero, a historic waterfront roadway that runs along the eastern edge of the city. Sections of the roadway were overtopped by bay water, forcing city officials to divert traffic and close lanes to prevent vehicles from becoming stranded. Commuters described scenes where water flowed across the pavement, pooling at intersections and creeping into nearby sidewalks and parking areas. While the flooding did not submerge entire buildings, it was deep enough in places to disrupt traffic and pose a risk to pedestrians. Across the wider Bay Area, the impacts were far more severe. In Marin County, north of San Francisco, some of the hardest-hit communities experienced flooding that residents said surpassed anything they had seen in decades. Mill Valley, Corte Madera, and Larkspur were particularly affected due to their low elevation and proximity to creeks, marshlands, and the bay. As high tide approached on Saturday morning, water levels began rising rapidly. In Larkspur's Marina neighborhood, streets turned into shallow canals as bay water spilled over curbs and into residential areas. Parking lots filled first, followed by roads, and eventually garages and ground-level structures. Many homes in this area are built several feet above ground level to reduce flood risk, but garages are typically constructed lower, making them especially vulnerable. Residents reported water entering garages by several inches, and in the lowest spots, water levels reached much higher, rendering vehicles unusable and damaging stored belongings. By mid-morning, multiple vehicles were stranded as drivers attempted to navigate flooded roads. Emergency responders were dispatched to assist motorists trapped in water that, in some locations, reached up to the lower doors of cars and SUVs. Authorities urged people not to attempt driving through flooded streets, warning that water depth can be deceptive and currents stronger than they appear. In Corte Madera, a nearby town, conditions were similarly severe. Shopping center parking lots filled with water, and access roads became impassable. Portions of Highway 101, a major north-south artery through the region, were partially overtopped, reducing traffic to a single lane in each direction at times. The resulting congestion stretched for miles, with some drivers stuck for hours as crews worked to manage traffic and assess road safety. Further north, in Sonoma County, flooding forced the complete closure of eastbound lanes of State Route 37 near its interchange with State Route 121. This stretch of highway is known for its vulnerability to flooding, as it runs through low-lying wetlands. During the peak of the event, water covered the roadway, making it unsafe for travel and cutting off a key commuter route between counties. The National Weather Service issued multiple warnings throughout the region, including coastal flood advisories and beach hazards statements. Residents were urged to stay away from seals, piers, rocky shorelines, and other coastal infrastructure. Forecasters warned that powerful waves and strong currents could sweep people into the water, even from areas that normally seem safe. The warnings were in effect for much of the day, spanning from early morning through the evening hours. As the tide peaked late Saturday morning, water levels reached their maximum extent. In many neighborhoods, flooding intensified quickly over the course of less than an hour. Residents who had left home early in the morning, when conditions still appeared manageable, returned to find streets submerged and access blocked. Some people were forced to abandon plans to return home, while others sought help from neighbors or emergency services. In several flooded neighborhoods, residents used kayaks, paddleboards, and even surfboards to move through the streets. Videos shared locally showed people paddling past submerged cars and flooded yards, a surreal but telling sign of how quickly the situation had escalated. While no widespread evacuations were ordered, authorities advised residents in the most affected areas to remain indoors until waters receded. Schools and public facilities were also impacted. At least one high school in Marin County reported flooding in a rear parking lot, though classrooms and main buildings remained dry. Local officials monitored conditions closely, ready to close facilities if water levels rose further. By late morning and early afternoon, as the tide began to recede, water levels slowly dropped. In some areas, however, standing water remained for hours, trapped by clogged drains and flat terrain. Cleanup efforts began almost immediately, with residents hosing out garages, moving damaged items, and assessing the cost of repairs. Despite the scale of the flooding, officials reported no fatalities or serious injuries in the San Francisco Bay Area directly linked to this event. Neighbors checked on elderly residents, helped move vehicles to higher ground, and shared resources as conditions improved. Emergency crews continued to patrol flooded zones, responding to calls for assistance and monitoring infrastructure for damage. The impacts of the storm were not limited to Northern California. Further south, in Santa Barbara County, heavy rain triggered flooding and landslides, leading to road closures and significant disruptions. In that region, authorities confirmed that at least one person died after being swept into a creek, underscoring the dangers posed by fast-moving floodwaters. Meteorologists warned that additional rounds of rain were possible in the days following the initial flooding. Forecasts indicated that the San Francisco Bay Area could receive more precipitation, with coastal mountain areas at risk of higher totals. With soil already saturated and tides remaining elevated, the risk of renewed flooding remained a concern. This event highlighted a growing vulnerability faced by coastal communities around the bay. Sea levels in the region have been gradually rising over recent decades, increasing the likelihood that high tides will push water into streets and neighborhoods. When combined with heavy rainfall, the result can be rapid and disruptive flooding, even in areas that have not historically experienced frequent inundation. For many residents, the January 2026 flooding served as a stark reminder that climate patterns are changing and that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. Longtime locals noted that while flooding had occurred in the past, the scale and speed of this event felt different. Water rose faster, reached higher levels, and impacted a broader area than many could remember. As cleanup continued and authorities reviewed the response, discussions turned toward long-term solutions. Infrastructure improvements, such as upgraded drainage systems, reinforced seals, and redesigned roadways, are increasingly seen as necessary to protect vulnerable areas. Urban planners and environmental experts have warned that without significant investment, events like this could become more common. In the days after the floodwaters receded, damaged vehicles lined streets, and the smell of saltwater lingered in garages and basements. Insurance claims were filed, repairs scheduled, and residents took stock of what had been lost. Yet there was also a sense of relief that the event had not claimed lives in the Bay Area, and that communities had come together to support one another. The January 2026 San Francisco Bay Area flooding was not caused by a single dramatic wave crashing ashore, but by the quiet, relentless rise of water driven by rain, tides, and geography. It was a reminder that some of the most dangerous natural disasters unfold not in an instant, but over hours, as conditions align and small changes compound into major impacts. As weather patterns continue to shift and coastal waters continue to rise, events like this are likely to shape the future of life along the California coast. For San Francisco and its neighboring communities, the flood of early January 2026 will be remembered as a warning, one written not in headlines alone, but in watermarks left on walls, garages, and streets across the bay.